Good morning. I'm delighted to welcome Tobias Dennehy, Head of People Experience at Siemens AG, who today will talk to us about people experience, which is very much in the title of his role. Tobias, good morning. Before we begin and get in the thick of people experience and what it means for you and for Siemens, could you tell us a little bit about your role as Head of People Experience at Siemens and what that role entails?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me and inviting me to this session. Head of People Experience is basically my role since 1 year, and I'm responsible for building up an understanding and an infrastructure of how important it is to listen to employees and starting to listen to them and act upon what we hear, where the pain points are for people along their journey, and then not act upon anticipations or gut feelings, but really upon the data that we get. And I joined about a year ago. Back then it was still called employee experience, but we broadened the perspective to not only employees, people with an employment contract, but really many people like also freelancers, contractors, part-time workers, all the gig economy things, those people working for Siemens who are not necessarily fully employed, but these are people we want to also listen to. So that's why it's a little bit a broader perspective. And I'm actually quite a newbie to the HR environment. So I started a year ago after doing many different things in the company before.
Exciting role, and I know that many of the colleagues in the audience today actually will have just started actually with that role of people experience leader, so they're going to be very interested in it. But before we start talking about how you enhance and enrich your people experience at Siemens, could you tell us a little bit about how you define it, how you define people experience?
Yeah, if you want, experience. And that's why maybe also my background in storytelling many years ago helps me a little, because I found out very early that experiences are nothing else but stories. So it's basically everything that we encounter every day that has a lasting impression on us and how we perceive things. So there's a lot about individual perception. There's a lot about emotions in there. So there's no clear process to how people will experience this situation or this interaction. It's very individual. So that's kind of a core understanding. It's really about individual perception of people in specific situations and how they actually, how they interpret this, how they act upon this, how they share these experiences or stories with others. This can be good or bad stories, talking about ENPS and stuff like that. So that it plays an important role how you felt in a certain situation and not necessarily how it really was. So that's kind of the core idea. And then it's really about a bottom-up approach, if you want. So if you want the classical engagement surveys that many companies and also Siemens is engaged in, they are very valuable, but they're more top-down, if you want, from a perspective that you have a certain amount of topics that are important for the company, for society, for whatever, where you need to know, like diversity or inclusion is one topic where you want to know where does the company stand, how do people feel about this. So it's also about feeling, but it's kind of given topics. And people experience goes from the bottom. It looks at the journey that people have with a company, from the very first moment of exploring, do I want to work for them, considering, onboarding, working, leaving again. So the whole journey, and then really looking at where they are, what kind of interactions are they having, and then open-minded just asking, how was your experience? So this is kind of what makes it a little bit different to a classical engagement survey. We don't know what the result will be. We don't know that, okay, we'll have a 90% okay for topic diversity, but we'll see where pain points are. And only when we know where the pain points are, we invite employees to say, let's have some workshops together, go in a design thinking approach and really come up with solutions together that will improve these experiences in future. So it's a little bit more grassroots, bottom up than other types of surveys maybe. Yeah.
So that last point that you made about, sort of working together on solution is something that I think, many of the organizations we are talking to and working with at the moment are finding particularly challenging and difficult. How do you involve people, get them on board, when you're amidst big transformation, change, as many of the organizations around the world are today? How do you go about that at Siemens AG in terms of, sort of getting people on board and helping and contributing?
I think it's of course challenging. It's probably even more challenging for a company of the size of Siemens because so many changes are going on, and the only constant in a company like Siemens for the last decades has been change. Yeah, so it's been transforming over and over again, and you hear of this and that and digitalization and many, many trends. So you have to make sure you don't overwhelm people with, hey, here's another thing. This is the big thing. It's called people experience, and we all want to be part of it. So it's not kind of this another big internal marketing campaign to make people aware that this is out there. It's more about maybe thinking big. So it's kind of the threefold approach that we take is to think big, have a big vision, but to start small and then iterate as we scale along the way. So the thinking big is, of course, at some point in time, we want to understand how people are experiencing every moment that matters, as they call it, along their journey, know where the pain points are, improve them, and iterate over time and see how this works. But you have to start somewhere. So I mean, if you say, no, well, we're going to do people experience everywhere as of now, it will not work because it will just be too big. So it's more about, launching a pilot here or there, starting really small, getting, partners in crime on board who believe in the idea and say, you know what, I think it's great. Let's start somewhere. Yeah. And a natural place to start, of course, is HR, because, that's, we're responsible for the people business. And it's always good to take care of your own backyard first before you go somewhere else. So kind of the classical recruiting, onboarding. That was also the first pilot that we did, because, that's something, you are the ones also owning the processes. You can, easily improve what is happening there. But then also move it outside of HR, because for me it's pretty clear people experience or employee experience is not an HR topic. It starts there, but I mean the most experiences you are making are in your everyday work. And those are probably 90% not related to HR processes or, your contact at HR. Every now and again you have a touch point, but most stuff will not happen there. So you have to also step outside of the HR boundaries as soon as possible. And then basically it's about, it's about listening. And if people in this small pilot get the feeling you're actually walking the talk and you're serious about this, and it's not just like we're pretending we're listening, but in the end we know what's best anyway, and we'll do it the way we planned, and we just want to get some data that proves that our idea was right. If they find out that, you're actually serious about this, meaning what we did, of course, we did kind of a baselining survey. So a representative sample throughout the company for the recruiting and onboarding part, saying, we need some baselining data to see where the pain points are. And when we found out where the pain points were, we actually deliberately invited employees, so kind of new hires, but also more experienced people, depending on the moments we're talking about, to engage with us in workshops, coming up with ideas, and then specifically for the onboarding part, a community started to grow around this, one group that was actually responsible for the onboarding process, and say, what, we'd like to keep this design thinking methodology and co-creation with employees, and ask the people from the workshops, do you want to be in this for a little bit longer? Because we're going to work on ideas, we're going to try them as MVPs, we're going to see if it works and whatever. And that's kind of how it works over time, to prove that you're actually meaning what you say, and then take people on board and change things according to people's input. And that's hoping that the word spreads, and once you get to somewhere else, people will have heard about it. So I think that's kind of more. We were also discussing the topic of consistency, if you want. How do you have this idea? How do you roll it out? Yeah? And I think that's also one thing where our whole organization is moving away from the old idea of governance and telling the whole organization this is how it's going to work, and templates here and stuff there, and if you don't adhere to the process, you're going to be punished in what way ever. So that's over. It's kind of more about trying to convince people that this is really great, and it's not just great for the company, it's great for you in your everyday job. And then if they're part of it, they feel this ownership, and they actually carry it forward by themselves. Yeah. So I mean, my ideal job is that at a certain point in time, when I've launched initiative A, B, or C, I'm not out of it, but I'm more or less out of it. So I'm kind of, I'm consulting, I'm a sparring partner, because when we have the infrastructure, the measurement, and the dashboard, and everything you need for it. But ideally, the person responsible for the topic is driving it by himself or by herself, because they believe in it, and there's also rewards behind it. So it's really a whole process of changing from governance to ownership, I would say.
Very, very helpful. Very good. Thank you for that deep description. I think that's really helpful. So just a question linked to that, actually. You say, sort of when the project is done, I'm sort of almost out of it. But I think you retain something, don't you, Tobias, in terms of stories. And that takes me to something that I noticed on your LinkedIn profile. You describe yourself as corporate story architect. Could you tell us more about storytelling and how you've used that in your life, but also how it might be used at Siemens again in terms of leaders, sort of coming across as authentic and connecting with employees and people across Siemens?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's maybe just a quick anecdote behind this title of corporate story architect. I mean, I gave that to myself in a period where I was exploring myself a little bit with story coaching and so on. And if you want to be interesting out there, you better not sound like everybody else. And then I talked to a friend of mine, and he said, you know what? You have to give yourself a title that doesn't exist. So that's when I came up with this, because the idea behind it back then, when I was working in the communications and marketing area more, it was about, coming from an overall brand story to core topics you want to talk about, and then actually finding the stories to bring these messages to life. And that's kind of the architecture. That's just the idea that I had behind this. So it's not a title I carry anymore that much. So now I'm the head of people experience, but there's a connection there, of course. So the connection is that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, experiences are stories and people are stories, are made up of stories. I mean, the things that you recall from your life, private or professional, and there's not really that much of a difference since the lockdown for many like me. So it's, the things you recall are not facts. They're not figures. They're actually stories. Yeah, I mean, stories that happened to you, experiences that you made, and this is as true for the communication department as it is for HR. So I think it's just the basic thing that consists of as human beings, if you want. And I don't know if you know Robert McKee, the screenwriting guru from Hollywood, who once said, stories are the currency of human contact. That's kind of the thing that makes us who we are. And I think that's where we come in as leaders in a company and as HR professionals, to go away from storytelling, because I think it's storytelling is good, yeah, but it's always like this: the preacher in church telling you stories. So it's kind of there's no real interaction or co-creation in storytelling. Maybe if you're sitting at a campfire and you're interacting with the storyteller, yes, but it's I think it's about story listening as much as it is about storytelling. So I think that's the business I would consider myself being in now, more story listening than storytelling. So through the data we gather, so through the surveys we make, and the surveys are, of course, there's a rating and know how satisfied were you with this interaction, that, but the interesting stuff comes in the free text field, when people actually put everything in context and maybe share a story here or there about, what actually made them feel a rating of -5 or whatever, yeah. So and that's where the point is, where I think there's a great chance of bringing what we do to life. So kind of, in an advertising sense, you would say find testimonials, but actually find people who are willing to share their stories, about the experiences they made, and don't be afraid to tell the bad experiences, yeah, because it's always, of course, if you're if you're a board member, if you're in PR, whatever, you always tend to tell the best practice stories, the good stories. But actually, the most inciting moments of our lives were probably always bad experiences, which maybe led us somewhere different. So I think that's kind of what makes it exciting for us to find these stories, find people willing to share them, and then maybe also over time say, you know what, because this happened and this was changed, my experience has improved. And that would kind of be a soft KPI maybe also for my job to see that I was successful. Yeah.
Great, thank you, very helpful. Love that aspect of work, telling stories, building stories, co-creating together. That's really essential. Now, Tobias, the €1 million question or £1 million or dollar question for you today. You talked about that link between, people experience, engagement, performance. Is that something that is taken for granted by leaders who say, we don't question it, we believe that there is a link and we don't want to know more? Or are you studying that relationship and trying to find some evidence that really a better people experience really increases engagement and business performance? Where are you at with that? Is that a priority, something that you're being asked to do, or not yet?
Not yet, but I'm trying to preempt the moment when I will be asked if there is, a real business impact of what we're doing. Now, but seriously, I think the fact that employee experience and also engagement surveys, it's kind of been put in the HR corner. And of course, everybody would say it's a very important unit, and it's very important for employees and so on. But I'm not too sure how many people would by themselves say that HR has a clear business impact. Just a hypothesis, yeah. Because it's maybe not that easy measurable. And I think that by doing experience measurement, it's maybe a first step of actually measuring where the impact is. And so I think it's there. It's kind of a feeling that yes, better or worse experience lead to more or less engagement. And then if you're in a position to shape bottom line, financial or even customer experiences, then you may be in a role, to improve these customer experiences and also business in the long run. But of course, I would never want to be responsible for that. So it's kind of the role of people experience or employee experiences in an organization is mainly to make things transparent, where pain points are, give tools, give instruments, give guidance, what should be done where, but then there should be and there need to be, owners of a certain journey stage or moment that actually then take care of it because they believe in it and drive it forward with your assistance. But I think it's because you asked, is that something that is taken for granted? I think not at all, but there's more and more research now that actually shows that there is this influence or there is business impact of people experience. But a study is nice, yeah. So what I set out or what we set out to do in a pilot we're working on actually right now, where I think my colleagues are looking at the data while I'm sitting here, so it's an exciting moment. We're conducting a pilot with sales. So it's not with HR. So basically found a unit that is interested, that do a lot with customer experience measurement, customer satisfaction, and they were very interested to see, can we do a survey with sales field staff, but also with sales frontline managers who need to prepare their sales staff and understand how their experiences are and what their pain points are, and then find out where the connection is between their experience and actually the customer experience. It's pretty close because if you're at the front out there with the customer, you can easily see where experience A has an influence on customer experience or whatever. So that's kind of something where I have a gut feeling that this connection exists. I can't prove it yet, so that's why, again, pilot is always a good approach to see, is there actually enough meat there to substantiate this idea? And then I think that's a great lever. If sales frontline managers say, if these two interactions were better over time, I'm sure I could be better at the customer side. So I think that will be a very strong message coming out of what we're doing. So I think that's something, it's not taken for granted. It's not maybe even on many people's radar, but I think it will be sooner or later. I mean, if you put resources into people experience, and even if it's just one person, like in our case, I mean, it's just me basically trying to organize a decentralized community, if you want. So there's no big people experience team in the headquarters of Siemens. But even if you put resources there, sooner or later somebody will ask, what are the results apart from people saying that they're happier, which is a good thing, but it's maybe not everything. So that's why I can only encourage everybody to think about ways to anticipate and preempt the question and have an answer when somebody comes with a question.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now, about the people experience that Siemens delivers, and I'm going to ask you now to put two hats on. First, the hat of head of people experience, and then, your own hat, Tobias, as an employee of Siemens AG. What makes you really, really proud? And I think, about your experience, I think you have something around the crabwalk, I think, that I've read that's particularly interesting in terms of development, training opportunities. But thinking of the people experience, what are you proud of about what Siemens is delivering?
Mm-hmm. So maybe with a professional hat on, I would say that we're actually really taking this seriously. So we're really, it's not like a side topic. Let's see what this people experience thing is, and if not, then we'll skip it again. It's actually become the center of the HR strategy of Siemens. So it's kind of understanding our people's experience is the center of creating an agile organization, creating resilient, relevant employees, creating different leadership and whatever. So it's kind of the core of understanding, and it's not just employees; it's also leaders and managers. So that's kind of. So I'm proud that this has become the core, and so that means we're taking it seriously. But also means, of course, we understand that it's a long-term thing. It's not like something where you will get an ROI per quarter. It will take a little longer, but I think that's something which gives me hope that it's not just another buzzword in the organization, but it's actually meant to be and come to last or come to stay. And maybe just on a side note, what also is kind of our chief people officer put that on LinkedIn also in the beginning of October, that we actually not only symbolically but also with this idea renamed or relabeled HR. So there's no HR at Siemens anymore. We're not thinking about human resources. We're not employing human resources anymore. We're actually, and that's what we're called people and organization now. We're actually more about empowering the people and the organization to be what they need to be in this new environment. So that's kind of things that makes me feel good and makes me look into the future with with a lot of hope for that topic. Maybe personally, because you mentioned the crab walk, and I stole that phrase or that with pride from Günter Grass, whom you might know, German author, and I wrote my thesis in university about it, so I spent a little time reading about him and reading his stuff, and there's this one book called Crab Walk, and it's more about stepping to the side and learning more and seeing more than by just going straight one direction, or in this case, and that's the analogy I made, by going up. So I started almost 20 years ago in this company, and there were many good and bad experiences, of course. And at the beginning, when you're young, you think the only way is up. If I don't go up, then I've failed. If I'm not a boss, or if I don't have a box around me, then I've failed. I didn't make a career. So that's kind of what you heard and what you felt, and it took some time for me to realize that this is not the only way. And that's what I'm also proud of, looking back at positive experiences that I made within the company, was that I got the chance to find this out by doing really interesting stuff along the way, stuff that I was not qualified for. So many things that I did, and just one example from when I was at a kind of a frustration point, and I said, either I'm gonna leave this company, or something is gonna change. And then suddenly someone came up who just knew me from somewhere and said, you know what? And I was I was working in the Siemens newsroom as the editor-in-chief at that point in time, and so comm stuff. And he said, you know what, do you want to be the government affairs official for Asia Pacific? And I was like, it sounds interesting. I don't have a clue about Asia, not about government affairs. And he was like, you know what, I know how you work. I think it's going to work. You're going to, and so kind of people giving you the chance to do something completely different. And then, of course, in addition, you have some courses here or there. Learned a little bit about, the course about Chinese mentality and whatever. So kind of you're given some assistance, and that happened repeatedly over time with interesting topics or projects that actually gave me the feeling, you know what, actually I'm on a horizontal career, if you want. It's really interesting to reinvent yourself every 2 or 3 years, and basically with the role I'm in now, I reinvented myself again a year ago. I don't know where. So for me, and Siemens proved that to me, that one of the stupidest questions to ask, which was, I don't know if HR people ask that anymore in interviews, but what was used to ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I would respond, I don't know, and I don't want to know. If I knew, I would be really bored right now already. And being in a company that gives you the opportunity to actually work in a different company every couple of years, even though you're in the same company, I think that's something that I'm proud of. That I took the opportunity, I got them, but I also took them. Of course, I mean, you have to be there at the right point and say, no, I'm going to try to do this, but you need to be offered these opportunities. And I think that's maybe the thing that makes me most proud of working for that company still.
Wonderful. Great. Final question, Tobias. In terms of people experience, we're going to have some colleagues in the audience today who are just getting started or may not have yet a people experience head or director. What would be your advice for organizations who are starting on that journey? Where should they start?
Mm-hmm. Again, I think I sketched it a couple of minutes ago. I think it's again about the starting small aspect, about launching 1 or maximum 2 pilots at the beginning, but doing them properly. Yeah? So kind of, and see where those are. That's very individual. For us, it was that we were, there were some feelings about some moments or interactions or journey stages that were not going particularly good, so we looked at them. There's also a different way of looking at it. So many peers of mine are doing a complete baselining first, if you want. So what you can also do is look at the whole journey, do a survey, representative sample in your organization, and then every moment, every touch point interaction, so a big one, and then see where are the pain points, and you choose the 2 worst parts of those, and that's where you work. So I think that we didn't look at the whole journey. We looked at 2 pilots first, but you can go both ways. So I think don't blow up the balloon too big at the beginning, because it's about to burst, I think. Yeah? So both in terms of the setup of people. So I'm still doing it on my own, more or less full time. That's fine. You don't need 5 people already to launch an employee experience team. But while you're doing these pilots, of course, you need some infrastructure in place. And I don't know, the smaller your company is, maybe starting from surveying facilities, from building a dashboard. But there's free tools. We do it in Power BI because it's part of our package here anyway. So we built it by ourselves. So you do need some infrastructure and stuff in place before you start, because of course when people say, oh, you've measured onboarding, what are the results? You can't just send them an Excel file. That's not that nice. So you should have it in a dashboard that visualizes and shows the changes over time. But for me, it's really about starting small, both in terms of resources, but also in terms of the scope. And then things will get bigger over time. And you can do it either like we did with HR, but also go outside of HR with a sales pilot. But you can also look at strategic topics that maybe a company has and say, under the roof of this strategic topic, there might be 7 or 8 moments in the journey that are specifically important, and measure those, because want to know how can we really improve this strategic initiative or whatever. So there's different ways, but if the audience just memorizes maybe one thing, I think just start small, and things will grow over time.
Tobias, thank you so much for your insights this morning. Vielen Dank, dass Sie heute mit uns über Menschenerfahrungen bei Siemens gesprochen haben.
Sehr gerne.
I tried my best.
Perfect. Your German is definitely better than my French, though.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for today, Tobias.
Well, thank you for the chance, and wish you a great conference.
All the best.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.